Greetings, everyone. Welcome to God Save the King, and I am your host, Tim Keyes. Thank you for listening to God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. You can listen to my show every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern on TBTRN. That is the Truth Be Told Radio Network. Now, God Save the King is my ongoing 30-plus year biblical, historical, and scientific research project devoted to retelling the Nativity the way it really would have happened. And this, frankly, is because the traditional Nativity story is Christian mythology and bears only the vaguest resemblance to, again, what really would have happened. So if you go to my website, you'll see that the tagline says, maybe the Nativity doesn't look like we think it does. So if you appreciate content like this, please like, follow, and subscribe to my posts and my videos, both on the Truth Be Told Radio Network and on God Save the King on our websites, and of course on our social media such as Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Rumble, etc., etc. You'll find that stuff all over the place. So we're really thrilled to have you here. The Truth Be Told Radio Network, their website is www.truthbetoldnetwork.org. My website, that is www.godsavetheking.org. And you can listen to, like I said, you can listen to this show every Friday night at 10 p.m. on either of those websites. Now, also, we have some great news to share with you all. We have expanded our podcast platforms. It's now available to get God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network on a variety of really popular podcast platforms that include Stitcher, Breaker, Anchor, Apple, of course, Audible, Google, Spotify, and Amazon. So check out whatever your favorite platform is, and you can find God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. And then as far as the applications that you can use, on any smart device, you can listen to our show. So you can use the Android app, MyTuner, Wi-Fi Radio, TuneIn, and of course, Alexa, Google, and Apple home devices to access God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. And last but not least, you can always dial in 641-741-2866 or 717-567-4977 to listen to God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. Now, if you haven't listened to my show before, let me remind those who have, or share with those of you who have not seen my show before or heard my show before. God Save the King, like I said, an ongoing 30-plus year research project devoted to retelling the Nativity story the way it really would have looked. So this project is based on four fundamental premises. Number one, Jesus was not born on December 25th. If you wipe the slate clean, start with no preconceptions and follow where the evidence goes, it will not lead you to December 25th. Number two, tradition is not evidence. Okay, it's just not. Tradition doesn't count as evidence. Number three, the traditional versions of the Nativity story rarely include the historical context. And that's really a crying shame, because the historical context is what turns this into an epic story, right? And then last but certainly not least, again, is number four, the Nativity is not a Christian story. Now, I know that will come as a shock to people. I know there's some people, unfortunately, that will be offended when they hear me say that. And that's not my intention. I don't mean to offend you. I'm just simply stating a fact. The Nativity story is not a Christian story. It is a Jewish story, and it must be returned to its Hebraic context in order for us to understand it properly. Because Joseph was a Jew, Mary was a Jew, Jesus was a Jew, and everything they did and said would have attested to that fact. And we will not understand the Nativity if we are looking at it through this false viewfinder called Christian tradition, especially the traditional Nativity story. If you're looking backwards through time from today and trying to look backwards 2,000 years through history, and you've got on this traditional Nativity story viewfinder, you're going to see things that aren't there. And that's not what we do here. What we do here is we wipe the slate clean. We build the evidence brick by brick and piece by piece to show you what the Nativity really would have looked like. And once again, I always love to repeat this. This is a great synopsis of what happened with the traditional nativity story, which is the fact that history became legend, legend became myth, and things that should not have been forgotten were lost. So the bottom line here is we have to rescue truth from familiarity. The traditional nativity story is so familiar to us that the truth sounds, frankly, almost ridiculous at times. But we're not afraid of that here on God Save the King. We are going to tell you the truth and what the nativity story really would have looked like. Now, when we left off last week, I was teasing you guys. We were starting to talk a little bit about these mysterious wise men from the East, who they were and why they played such a critical role in the nativity story, because they show up, it appears as if they show up out of nowhere, whereas that's not exactly true, but it kind of appears that way. So that's understandable that they would appear to show up out of nowhere, that you think that, at least that's understandable, but it's not really what happened. But I shared some commonly overlooked points about the Magi and their visit to Herod. So I want to review those very quickly, frankly, but then we're going to move on. I'm going to use that as a teaser, and we're going to move into some very closely interrelated information about the Magi. But here's some factoids about the Magi that will get you thinking. Number one, they came out of Parthia. Parthia was the other superpower on the planet at that time. If you go to an old map and you look at the nation of Israel, right? Everything to the west was the Roman Empire. Pardon me. Everything to the west was the Roman Empire, and everything to the east was the Parthian Empire. And those were the two superpowers of their day. So this is actually a huge big deal, and why historical context is so important. Number two, the Magi were not unknown to Herod. Okay. Like I said, it appears as if they showed up out of nowhere, but not really. Herod would have known they were coming. That's something we'll talk about on another show. And he would have known full well who they are and what their job description was. And that's very critical because, frankly, the Magi were kingmakers. That's what they did for a living. One of their many responsibilities, as they had a dual role of both political and religious role in the Parthian Empire in what is called the House of Magistenes. So despite Judea being a client kingdom, and as a matter of fact, I shouldn't say despite, based on the fact that Judea was a client kingdom of Rome, okay, Judea and Parthia would have had diplomatic relations and foreign policy between them. Yes, Judea would have been representing Rome, make no mistake, right? And they were controlled by Rome, but there would have been diplomatic relations. There would have been, I don't know if there would have been a lot of trade, but there would have been some trade because, man, how could there not be, frankly? But there definitely would have been diplomatic relations. Also, the Magi already knew when they arrived, they knew that Herod was a Roman appointee, right? He was a Roman client king, not a legitimate king of Judea, right? And when they arrived, they had absolutely no fear or hesitation in confronting Herod and saying, oh yeah, hey, by the way, where is the legitimate king? Very, very interesting that they expressed no fear or hesitation because they were convinced that they were going to find a great king. And it's highly probable that they knew they were coming for the Hebrew Messiah, not just the king, right? Not just a nationalist king, but the actual Messiah. That's very probable that they knew that, and they frankly may have even known that they were coming in search of the King of Kings, the King of the universe. That's possible as well. Not really sure about that one, but it's definitely possible. And then finally, and this is part of what makes me think that way, is that when we read the phrase, we have come to worship him, that indicates that they were ready to submit themselves to this great king's rulership. And that is extremely provocative. Why would they do that? Why would they arrive from another country and say, we are here to submit ourselves to your rulership? Very, very interesting. So I want to move on from there, though, because what I want to talk about today, I want to look at some very closely interrelated information about the Magi, because one of the huge questions about the Magi, of course, is who were they? Who were they and what did they do? And how did they know about his star? And why did they apparently drop everything and travel to Judea? That is a pretty darn big deal. Okay. So who were these guys, right? Well, let's start with this simple fact. Okay. We can start by mentioning the fact that we can reasonably establish, and I use the word reasonably intentionally there, as if we were in a court of law, right? Reasonable doubt. We can reasonably establish that an elite class of highly educated, politically and religiously influential celestial observers existed in Mesopotamia as early as 3100 BC. Okay, let me repeat that. I tripped over my tongue a little bit. Let me say that again. We can reasonably establish that an elite class of highly educated, politically and religiously influential celestial observers existed in Mesopotamia as early as 3,000 years before Christ. So let me put something here up on my screen share so that you can look at a picture. Okay. Now, I mentioned this a little while ago on one of my other shows. And I had to look into it because I had to do my due diligence and make sure that this was something that was available. And of course, I just dropped it off my screen. Let's go back. There we go. This is a clay cuneiform tablet that is in the collection at the British Museum in London. And this cuneiform tablet is known as the planisphere. Okay. It's designated clay tablet K8538, and then it's been dubbed the planisphere. Okay. Now, this tablet was presumed to have been discovered and retrieved from the Royal Library at Nineveh. Okay. Which is the modern equivalent is Mosul in Iraq, which is really interesting because, years ago and even continuing to today, we all have all this hubbub going on in Iraq, and Mosul has now become a household name, right? Well, Mosul is very, very close, only a few miles away from the archaeological site that would have been the ancient city of Nineveh, where there was this spectacular collection that we call a library, this spectacular collection of clay tablets, right? So this was one of the clay tablets discovered and retrieved in the middle of the 19th century by Austin Henry Layard. Now, he was a British archaeologist. He was one of the first ever, quote unquote, archaeologists to do work in the ancient Near East, or what we would call the Middle East today. Now, part of the reason I mention that is because the earliest archaeologists, they had not refined the art and science of archaeology just yet. So it's tragic that they probably lost or destroyed as much as they retrieved, okay? Because they would just shove a shovel into the ground, and if you were hitting a collection of clay tablets, you would start breaking those clay tablets. So, and then in addition to that, they didn't record everything they pulled out. There wasn't someone sitting there, with let alone a computer, wasn't even sitting there with a notebook saying, okay, here's a clay tablet. It's about 6 inches in diameter. It's about 1 inch thick. It's reddish brown in color. And we're going to designate this one clay tablet number 101, right? There wasn't someone doing that. So we can only kind of presume that this was found by Henry Layard and his team in the middle of the 19th century, roughly 1850, 55, 1860, right in there. Now, this tablet is unique in many ways. Number one, it's circular. Not all clay tablets are circular. many of them, if not most of them, are rectangular or in different shapes. So this one is unique because it's round, and also it will fit in your hand. Okay, this one is about 7 inches in diameter, 6.5, 7 inches in diameter, and therefore it will fit in a man's hand, and you'll understand why in a moment. Okay, so a couple of unique features. Like I said, it's circular, about 6 to 7 inches in diameter. There is writing only on one side. If we were to flip it over, there wouldn't be any writing on the other side. And then also, it is what's the word I want to use here? It is on the writing side, it is convex, and then on the non-written side, it is concave. Okay, now I got my cursor up on the screen here. If you look at these lines, you can see this line right here, and then see this line right here, and then see this line right here, and then here, and then again here. This tablet is divided into 8 sections as if it were a pie, frankly, right? It's divided into 8 sections, and it's believed that those 8 different sections are 8 different sections of the night sky. And then you can also see you've got some, here, let me get it back. Here we go again. You can see we've got some blank sections here. We got a whole section here that's blank, and we got a whole section over here that's blank. And that's because the original tablet, or the one that was recovered anyway, was damaged, and it had been damaged in a fire. So that is, and it had been damaged in a fire around about the time that it was written. Okay, not later, around the time it was written. But that's why when they reproduce it, right? So like this here, for example, I'm not absolutely precisely sure if this is the clay tablet or whether this is a reproduction, because we know they made reproductions of it for people to study. Okay, so once again, to blow through these unique features: round, 6 to 7 inches in diameter, concave on the outside, or convex on the outside, concave on the inside. And that means these cuneiform markings, they're very small. They are very, very small, divided into 8 sections, which we believe refer to different segments of the night sky, because what has been determined pretty solidly is the fact that this is the content here. Once the cuneiform was translated, is that the content here is astronomical in nature. This is an astronomical tablet, including diagrams of constellations, right? Including diagrams of constellations and the names of constellations, which is why this tablet has been dubbed the planisphere. Okay, now it was discovered, it was retrieved in about 1850 AD, right? It was most likely written in about 700 BC, and the text is in Sumerian. The text is not in the contemporary Akkadian language. It's in Sumerian, and then there's a reason they did that. Lots of professionals deliberately use dead languages to preserve the precise meaning of the written text. So like to this day, in many courtrooms, they use Latin. Latin is used in medicine. And then, of course, biblical scholars make heavy use of Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, not only because that is the language of the ancient text, but those are dead languages, which means there's no ambiguity due to the language transforming over time, right? The language is no longer a living language. Therefore, the language is no longer changing according to common use today. It's a dead language, so we know what it meant back then. So that was the reason they used Sumerian instead of contemporary Akkadian, is because this is a copy of a much older tablet. That is the point. And there's one last detail I want to point out about this that is really stunning. I don't know exactly where it is on the tablet, but according to my sources, on this tablet, there are some of these markings refer to stars that are at less than NEO magnitude. Now, what that means is NEO stands for naked eye observation, and magnitude simply means how bright the star is, or in this case, how bright the star isn't, because apparently this lists stars that are at less than NEO magnitude. That means you can't see them with the naked eye, and yet they knew they were there. We can see them today with a telescope, okay, or another instrument, because we can magnify the light in order to see it, to find it. How did these ancient Mesopotamians see stars that were not available to the naked eye? That's pretty stunning. So this is really, really amazing, because detailed examination of this text and the features of the tablet indicate that it is a copy of a text dated from the 4th millennium BC. Not the 4th century, the 4th millennium, right? This tablet is likely from 3100 BC. Absolutely stunning. And part of the reason they know that, or part of the reason they suspect that, is because it appears to record a very, very dramatic astronomical event. Now, this is part of why this tablet may still exist, because what they also have determined is that this was a field record. The reason this is round and the size of a man's hand, and the reason it's convex on the outside, is because it would make this tablet easier to hold and scribe and see in low light when an observer was doing his morning or evening observation. And they'd have some type of artificial light, a lamp, of some type, an oil lamp, or candles or something like that. So they did have some artificial light, but to be able to mark this thing, the fact they could hold it in one hand, could hold the stylus in the other, and then mark the tablet in low light would have been critical. So what they also determined about these tablets is that they would mark in the tablet, and then they would keep the tablet for, like a week or so, or maybe 2 weeks, and at least in theory, transfer it to a more permanent tablet. And then they would take a wet rag or a sponge or something of that nature, and they would wipe it clean, and they would reuse the tablet. Pretty stunning. So this appears to be, from the best we can tell right now, this appears to be a reusable clay tablet that was used as a field reference, a field record in about 3100 BC, but that the reason this particular one still exists is because it includes a record of an extraordinary astronomical event that they literally may have witnessed. Now, it's always possible that this is a copy of a copy, right? But the general hypothesis about this is that this recorded an astronomical event that was witnessed, right? And it was a very dramatic, very stunning event that we're not going to talk about here because it will derail our conversation, okay? But this is pretty amazing that this is so like I said, this establishes the fact that we had an elite class of highly educated celestial observer in Mesopotamia in the 4th millennia BC. And they were politically and religiously influential because this tablet still exists. And it was copied, 2,500 years later? Do the math. My math hasn't been really that great lately. I've been embarrassing myself. But yeah, 700 years. What's that? 2,400 years later, somebody copied this tablet. It was important enough to copy it. So this is piece of evidence number one with regard to establishing the fact that we have this elite class of celestial observer hanging out, in the 4th millennia BC. And the reason I'm hesitating and stuttering here is I just realized that my next graphic is not in place. So bear with me for a second here while I fumble around and find my next graphic, because I was supposed to have it ready for you. Here, let me switch over here. Let's do this. You can look at my face while I look around here. See if I can find this really quickly. Get this graphic up here. There, that'll have to do. There we go. Let's get that up there. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so now let me get this on screen. So what we're going to do now, come on, there we go, is we are going to fast forward from that date, right, 3100 BC, fast forward about 1500 years to the middle of the 2nd millennia BC. So this is what is known as the Venus tablet of Amisaduqa. Okay, now the Venus tablet of Amisaduqa is one of a collection of clay tablets. It's tablet number 63 of the Enuma Anu Enlil, which is the quote-unquote Babylonian Bible of astronomy and celestial observation. And it's this extensive catalog of astrological omens, okay? Most of it is not charts and catalogs and lists. Most of it is records of the actual omens and what they believed the omens meant. But this is a catalog. This is a list that covers about 21 years of time of the heliacal risings of the planet Venus between roughly 1646 and 1626 BC during the reign of King Amisaduqa of Babylon. Now, the reason we're pointing this out is very simple. We learn from this. Okay, number one, this is a meticulous record. This is a meticulous record, okay? This means they had to watch every day, day in and day out, for the heliacal risings of the planets and of the stars for that matter, but in this case, a planet, right? And they wrote these down. And they wrote these down not just for a year or two, but this is a record of 20 years of heliacal risings of Venus. In one of my sources, they wrote that the Magi were pedantically accurate to the point of absurdity, right? So they really paid attention to what they were doing. Now, take note, I just called them the Magi, and what I need to do here is make a quick correction and quick observation, which is the fact that what I'm doing here, here's what I'm after, is that I am demonstrating the fact that you have this extraordinary history of celestial observation that existed in ancient Mesopotamia, right? We know that it existed at the time of Christ. We know that it existed at the time of Daniel. We know that it existed during the reign of King Amisaduqa, and we know that it existed in 3100 BC, that there was this, once again, elite class of highly educated celestial observer that was both politically and religiously influential, right? Here's what we don't know. We don't know when they began to be called the Magi. That we do not exactly know. Now, we'll cover the history of that in another episode, because we do have ancient records of when the label Magi began to be used. We are going to mention it tonight. I'm going to mention it here in a few minutes, as a matter of fact. We are going to talk about when the label Magi began to be used, but I'll devote an entire show to the label Magi and who were they and how did that label get started and how did that label then get attached to this class of elite celestial observer. Okay, so now back to the tablet of Amisaduqa here. Like I said, this teaches us several things. It teaches us that this scholarly class of celestial observer was absolutely at work in the middle of the 2nd millennia BC. This is a meticulous record of celestial observations. It also demonstrates to us that heliacal risings were extremely important. If they're recording them, they were very, very important to them. And then one other thing that this demonstrates to us, if we use a type of reverse engineering here, is that, well, who wrote these? Well, it's obvious that these were written by the celestial observers themselves. These were the cats that were going out at night and taking a leather hard clay tablet out there with them and an oil lamp and a stylus, a triangular stylus, and then looking at the stars and then painstakingly making these markings in these little circular field recordings that were then transmitted and transposed and translated into a larger catalog such as this. I mean, that is really, really stunning. So their records were meticulous, and they paid extraordinary attention to the heliacal risings of planets. Now, this is the heliacal rising of Venus. We're more interested in the heliacal rising of Jupiter, but this just demonstrates that they were, frankly, obsessed with this. As my source says, pedantically accurate to the point of absurdity. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? So now let's do this again. Let me hit stop on my screen share and go back to my screen share and grab another graphic here. All right. Got to find it. There it is. Go back here. There we go. Now, so here we go again. One more time. Now, what is this? This is another clay tablet. Now, this clay tablet is designated tablet VAT, capital VAT. I do not know what that stands for. Tablet VAT 4956, and this is in the Berlin Museum, right? Because the Europeans, they're the ones that did the bulk of this type of archaeology in the Middle East in the middle of the in the middle of the 19th century, okay, AD. 150, 175 years ago-ish was when they were digging in the Middle East. Now, what is very, very interesting about this tablet is that this tablet documents the reign of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Okay, so this is, of course, a Babylonian king who is extremely familiar to Bible readers. We know all about Nebuchadnezzar because of the book of Daniel, right? So we know who Nebuchadnezzar is. Well, this is amazing because this is a secular external document that not only verifies that Nebuchadnezzar existed, but actually verifies the conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BC. That is in this tablet. Okay, this tablet tells us straight up that the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem in 586. And we have a record, okay? I don't have it on a graphic here. I'll just have to read it to you, but I have a different graphic that I will share with you in a second. Because our record, one of the places we turn to is not only the book of Daniel, but if we look at the book of Jeremiah and we read Jeremiah chapter 39, verses 1 through 3, this is what we read. Okay, we read verse 1, in the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army came against Jerusalem and besieged it. In the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, on the 9th day of the month, the city was penetrated. Then all the princes of the king of Babylon came in and sat in the middle gate. Nergal-Sharezer, Samgar, Nebo, Sarsechem, the Rabsaris, Nergal-Sharezer, the Rabmag, and the rest of the princes of the king of Babylon. Now, this, I didn't take the time to dive into this deeply. I will in another show. I'll put it up on a graphic and we will separate this out. This is a combination of names and titles. It looks like names, but it's also titles mixed in. So let me get this other graphic up here for you, because let me read off this list of names and titles again. We read Nergal, Nergal, Nergal-Sharezer. Samgar, what looks like, at least in the English, right? Transliteration looks like Samgar Nebo, right? But then you have Sarsekim, and then in brackets, the Rabsaris, and then Nergal-Sharezer, the Rabmag, right? Now, interesting that you've got Nergal-Sharezer there twice. Appears to be two guys with the same name, right? It's not a repeat of the same man. It's a repeat of two men, and that the second one is identified as the Rabmag, okay, in order to differentiate him from the other Nergal-Sharezer also mentioned in the same verse. So now let me get another document up here. Come on, baby. Let's go. There we go. So this is some of the information from Jeremiah 39, and where it says Sarsekim the Rabsaris, right? If you look this up in your own Bible, you will see the name Sarsekim, right? And that he is called the Rabsaris, right? And now the definite article the may be in italics or it may be in brackets in your Bible because it's not in the original Hebrew, but it is properly provided because it is a title. Rabsaris is a title, okay? So Sarsekim, the Rabsaris, means Sarsekim, the chief eunuch. Rab is chief or head, and then Saris is eunuch. So Sarsekim is the chief eunuch. Now, also take note that when you read Jeremiah 39, it looks like Samgar Nebo is like one word or a hyphenated word, but it appears that Nebo actually belongs with Sarsekim, that it is part of his name. See, just as Nebuchadnezzar is part of his name, this would be Nebo Sarsekim. Okay, so it's part of his name. Okay, so a little bit difficult to parse out here, but Nebu Sarsekim was the Rabsaris, the chief of the eunuchs. Now, Nergal-Sharezer, the Rabmag, this means that Nergal-Sharezer is the chief, Rab, the head. He is the head of the Magi. That is what Rabmag means. All right. He is the chief of the Magi. So what we've got here, and then so let me add one more fact. This Sarsekim guy is documented in another document. I don't have a graphic of it. I wish I did. I'll keep working on it until I can hopefully find a photo record of this. That Sarsekim is documented in an economic document found in the Babylonian city of Sippar, right? Now, Sippar, if I remember off the top of my head, is south of Babylon, but it was one of their holy cities, right? So there would have been a temple there, and there would have been a library there. And the library of Sippar, once again, if I remember off the top of my head, yielded like 10,000 clay tablets. Library at Nineveh yielded like 30,000 clay tablets. But in a tablet found in Sippar, we have an external record of Sarsekim. So the Sarsekim of the Bible, and the dates line up properly and everything like that. So the Sarsekim of the Bible has independent documentation as being a real person, right? So this list of Babylonian officials that we find in Jeremiah 39 is accurate, right? We've got independent verification that this is the case. And this also means that we have independent verification that by the 6th century BC, Babylonian officials were using the title Magi or Magus or Mag, right? This would have been in Aramaic as opposed to Hebrew or Babylonian, right? Now it's a transliteration of Babylonian, right? But that's why, but Babylonian and Aramaic are very closely related. But that's where we would have gotten this label Rabmag. And then I didn't go there. I've got it in another graphic from my TV show. We'll pull it up some other time. But when Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we take note of the fact that, Nebuchadnezzar had this very disturbing dream, and he put out the word that his wise men needed to interpret this dream, that he needed to know what was going on. And no one could interpret it for him. No one could understand it or interpret it. So Nebuchadnezzar, put out the word that, hey, you guys better figure this out. If you don't figure out this dream, it's not going to be very good for you guys. There will be punishment. And since Daniel and his friends, as Hebrew captives, were being trained to be court officials in the court at Babylon, they fell into that same designation. Now, they were in training at that point. They weren't officials just yet, but they were in training. Then, of course, we know how the story goes. Daniel beseeches the Most High God, who graciously gives him the interpretation of the dream. And then that way, Daniel is able to report to Nebuchadnezzar. And then what happens as a result? We know the end of the story. The story tells us that Nebuchadnezzar appointed Daniel to be the chief of all the wise men of Babylon. So in other words, Daniel was appointed Rabmag. Daniel was appointed the chief of the Magi, or a chief of the Magi, might be a more accurate way to put it. Now, he's not present at the conquest of Jerusalem. He's back in Babylon, because the one referenced here in 586 is actually the second siege of Jerusalem. Daniel was taken captive in the first siege, right? So he's back in Babylon, and probably for a very good reason, right? He's back in Babylon. I don't know the timing. I don't know whether Daniel would have interpreted the dream before this or after this. It's a good question. We'll have to chase that one down and see if there's anything significant in that. But Daniel's back in Babylon because either he's not been appointed Rabmag yet, or if he has been, he's probably got more important things to do than be accompanying Nebuchadnezzar on this siege. He's probably back in Babylon taking care of things, seeing to affairs of state. But this is really, really, really interesting here that we have at least these three. There's going to be more. At least these three clay cuneiform tablets that are, oh yeah, by the way, I totally forgot to mention. Let me get this back up here. I can't believe I forgot to mention this. Let me get back to screen share here and get this one back up on screen. This is, let's go back here. So this is VAT 4956 in the Berlin Museum. What I forgot to mention about this is that the date 586 is mentioned in the document because it is a record of the conquest of Jerusalem in 586. So that is why, actually it's reverse. Let me take that back. It's reverse engineered. It's reverse engineered. We are told in the document that this document is year 37 of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Okay, so then if you go backwards and add 37, right, we get when Nebuchadnezzar's reign started. And I guess I was right the first time. The fact of the conquest in 586 is mentioned in this document, right? So the document itself was written in 567 BC. The document itself was written in 567 BC, and it references the second siege in 586 BC, and then it also references the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, 37 years prior to 567 BC. So you've got to do a little bit of math juggling to get your dates straight there. But the reason I bring this up is because this is an astronomical record. In addition to being an historical record, it's an astronomical record because it records the positions of moons and planets in the 37th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and it confirms the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. So pretty stunning documentation of what is going on here. The fact that we've got Sarsecum he's not mentioned in this document, he's mentioned in another document, but this verifies the record of Jeremiah 39, where we have a list of officials. And then, like I said, we've got this other document that tells us about Sarsecum. We know that Sarsecum was the chief eunuch. We know that Nergal-Sharezer was the chief magi. We also know that Daniel was appointed chief of the magi by Nebuchadnezzar. So this starts an hypothesis that is reasonable, although we cannot absolutely prove it, which is the fact that by the time you get to the Gospel of Matthew, right? By the time you get to the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew calls these guys magi, right? Wise men, magoi in Greek, right? Magoi would be plural, and then magus would be singular, right? But Matthew calls them that. He doesn't have to explain what he's doing. Everybody understands that these are these very intriguing and interesting wise men from the East, right? And they show up so back to the beginning of our show, right? They show up at the court of Herod the Great, and they say, "Where is he who is born king of the Jews?" Right? And remember the facts that I shared at the beginning, that they're coming out of Parthia, right? These are Parthians. And we'll talk more about the Parthian Empire and the development of the Parthian Empire and the relationship between Parthia and Judea and Rome and how that would have played into the nativity story. But they came out of Parthia. By this time in the history of the Magi, they were known as the House of Magistanes. Okay, Parthia had basically a parliamentary system, what we would call a parliamentary system. Okay, now that's not exactly what it was, but that's the best descriptive word that we have. So there would have been two houses. The upper house was the house of the royals. It was simply the royalty, right? And then the lower house was the House of Magistanes, the Magi, right? And the House of Magistanes, the Magi, it's very interesting to note that they had three definitive responsibilities. And of course, just a coincidence that we find all three of these responsibilities listed in the Bible. They were responsible for, see, and here we go, right? Here we go. I'm going to duck off camera for 1 second and grab a book so I can hold it up on camera for you guys to see it. 1 sec. All right, we're back. So now let's do this in front of the camera. It's always tricky to do this backwards, right? So take a look at the front of this book. It's from the State Archives of Assyria, right? Volume 8, right? And it is called Astrological Reports to Assyrian Kings, okay? Now, yes, it says Assyria, and we're talking about Babylon, but those two are almost interchangeable because you're talking about Assyria being the dominant empire in northern Mesopotamia, and then Babylon being the dominant empire in southern Mesopotamia. Now, they were dominant at different periods of time, but the practices of their royal courts were extraordinarily similar, right? And we know that this elite class of highly educated celestial observer with both political and religious influence existed in all the royal courts throughout Mesopotamia, going back at least 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. Okay, so the fact that we are getting some of our information from the royal court of Assyria, no big deal, because the practices were so similar that we can pretty much plug and play and recognize that the practice would have been virtually, if not literally, identical in the Babylonian court. Because what those are, okay, is that is a catalog of the daily intelligence briefing given by the Magi to the king. Because what the Magi would do is that in addition to their morning and evening observation, where they would go out and record the positions of the stars and the moon and stuff like that for the day, they would then compare it to these catalogs, right, to the Enuma, Anu, and Enlil, their catalog of astrological omens, and they would say, "Oh, great king, this is what the stars are saying," right? Okay. And then the king would then determine whether certain, royal decrees need to be made, because for one thing, they definitely, there were not only were there astrological interpretations to these omens, but there was also extremely practical interpretations to these omens as well, because of the fact that they would go out year to year and go, "Oh, look, there's XYZ over on the horizon at this time of year. That means it's this month. And, we got to start planting crops, or the Euphrates or Tigris River is going to flood," or whatever the case might be. It was a giant calendar, right? So there was some eminently practical information included in these omens. But like I said, the Enuma, Anu, and Enlil, right, it's almost entirely, it's like 70% omens. It's not 70% charts. It's 30% charts and 70% omens. So that book I just pointed out to you there, that is a collection of the omens, right? And it helps us understand what was important, what kinds of celestial observation were important to the Babylonians, what would have gotten their attention. That's very critical. What would have gotten their attention? And because of the Venus tablet of Amisaduqa recording the heliacal risings of Venus, we know that heliacal risings of planets were extremely important to these guys. That is something they would have watched very meticulously. So this brings us back to Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, where we read that, wise men came from the east to visit Herod in Jerusalem, and then they said, "For we have seen his star in its rising, in its heliacal rising," right? So that was what keyed off the Magi. That was what got their attention, was the heliacal rising of a planet, which is something that was unique to them, right? Or not unique, that's not the right word. It was something significant to them, right? That got their attention. But then the other part of the puzzle, which is conjecture, but it makes complete sense, is, but then how did they know that it was the Jewish Messiah, right? Now, this would have been the heliacal rising of Jupiter in conjunction with Regulus in Leo on July 29th of 3 BCE, okay? 3 BC, July 29, heliacal rising of Jupiter in conjunction with Regulus in Leo, right? In Leo. So, Jupiter, throughout classical antiquity, was known as the king planet. Regulus was known throughout classical antiquity as the king star. Okay? So now you have the king planet and the king star. Now that's widely known. That's widely known, right? So even to the Babylonians, they would have been going, "Oh, that's interesting. You've got the king planet and the king star in conjunction with the sun during a heliacal rising." So that right there probably would have got their attention. But what appears to have also happened is that there was a subset or a subtext of arcane knowledge that appears to have maybe been started by Daniel, that was interwoven with what these wise men believed. And this could be why when they realized that it was occurring in the constellation of Leo, okay, that directed them to Judea, because according to the Hebrews, and if Daniel had managed to impart this, and even if a secret society of Daniel's followers had followed his teachings for the last 600 years at this point, then they would have said, very interesting here, they would have noticed that, wow, you've got the king planet and the king star in the royal constellation of Leo. This is ridiculously rare astronomical occurrence, and it's extremely important. Now, mathematically, it probably could have occurred 3,000 or 4,000 years earlier. And, based upon what I've shared tonight, it appears that they were making celestial observations that far back. Okay, that you did have Mesopotamian astronomers that far back. So we don't know whether they had ever seen this before or not, but I speculate that this was the first time that this sign had ever been observed in human history. And it certainly was the first time that this star had this celestial had been observed by observers. In other words, they paid special attention to this. So I made up this graphic that reads, the planet Jupiter was known throughout classical antiquity as the king planet. The star Regulus was known as the king star. Jupiter is called Tzedek in Hebrew, meaning righteousness, and Regulus was known as Melech, meaning king. So on July 29th, 3 BC, the heliacal rising of Jupiter, the king planet, occurred in conjunction with Regulus, the king star, in the royal constellation of Leo. This was likely the first time this precise combination of celestial objects had ever been observed in human history. And this final little point here, with Jupiter being called Tzedek and Regulus being called Melech, if you put the two of them together, that would be pronounced Melchizedek. Melchizedek. So isn't it provocative to note that it is very possible that someone looked at this combination of celestial objects and went, oh my God, Melchizedek. A righteous king, the king of righteousness, has been born. So yeah, there's a little bit of conjecture in there, but it's conjecture that makes an awful lot of sense. So we are going to wrap it up there. I thank you for listening to God Save the King. Remember, you can listen to God Save the King every Friday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Truth Be Told radio network. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Tim Keyes. I am the host of God Save the King, and we will see you next time.